Do you feel like your kids don't start listening to you until you raise your voice and start yelling? If that sounds at all familiar to you, you want to watch this video. I'm here with Dr. Scott Turansky, one of the co-founders of the National Center for Biblical Parenting, and someone who I've come to really admire over the years as a mentor and as a friend. He is one of the co-founders of the National Center for Biblical Parenting and has introduced this concept of a heart-based approach to parenting and how it can transform kids and families. So Dr. Turansky, why don't you just introduce yourself a little bit here? And we're going to be talking about how do we help our kids learn how to obey without us yelling and screaming. So maybe you can start by defining obedience for us.
Sure. I really enjoy working with parents. I have my own clients I work with, obviously, but we've trained over 500 coaches now who work with parents one-on-one. Obviously, you're one of those. We also have trained presenters who teach parenting seminars around the country, and you're one of those too. So we're really grateful for your continued your just desire to pass this wealth of information that parents want today. Parents are hurting today. They need help. They want help. And I think the idea of obedience has some negative connotations for many. Sometimes parents imagine a drill sergeant type modality here as they're working with their kids, and they don't want to have that. They want to have a relational approach. And I think a relationship is really important. And so we want to build a relationship with children, but we also want to teach them obedience, because in obedience, there's several things that children learn. They learn a sense of obligation, which is the beginning of responsibility training. That I need to. That's what they learn. They also learn how to let things go because they're involved in something and you call their name and they come. So they're learning how to let things go, which is the beginning of emotional management in children. Children learn how to cooperate. That is, they learn to give up their agenda and work with another person. That is essential for healthy relationships going forward. In fact, I believe God has hidden within obedience the secret ingredients children need to be successful in life. So many things are hidden within that. So we're not just a drill sergeant kind of mentality with our kids, but we're really teaching them what it means to obey. It's God's instruction for children, and so many good things are hidden within it. I would say obedience, to answer your question, obedience is doing what someone says right away without being reminded. I think that is a good definition that gets even young children started as young as 2 or 3 years old as we're trying to teach them about it.
What do you say to that parent, maybe that parent of a 3-year-old who says, gosh, I don't know if this is developmentally appropriate for my kid. I don't want to do anything that isn't developmentally appropriate for them.
I do think that being developmentally appropriate is important. We need to consider a child's development, how their brain is working, what they're able to accomplish. So we're not going to send a 3-year-old into a room and go clean up your bedroom that's a mess. That kind of an instruction is unreasonable. But to have a child stop what they're doing and come to the table to eat, or to have a child clean up that toy before you go and play with another one. Those are ways that children can learn how to follow instructions, and it's teaching them some very important things about life. So we start young with children. In fact, I would say that part of following instructions is learning how to come when called. When children who are 2, 3 years old learn they come when called, it is a survival skill.
Yeah.
There's some parents who have leashes on their children. I would say you don't have to have a leash on your child if you use the instruction routine well and you teach your child to come when called. Because when you call that child's name, he should feel a sense of obligation that my name's been called, I need to come. Or she should feel that sense of obligation that she needs to stop what she's doing and pay attention to what the parent's saying. Whether their child's young or old, it's very important for them for their life skills as they're developing.
Wow, that's amazing. And, I was reading your book, Home Improvement, just so that our audience knows here, you and the other co-founder, Joanne Miller, have written lots of books over the years, but Home Improvement's one that I've been rereading. And you talked right away in chapter 1 about action points and how knowing your action point can help you not be yelling at your kids to get them to move and do things. Can you help us understand what an action point is?
Yes. So we created a video series that accompanies the book now. The video series is called Home Improvement, A Practical Theology for Parenting, because we want parents to understand the theology behind the practical things that we're doing. So in the book, then, We teach parents about an action point because the action point is the hands and feet of the theology of parenting when it comes to obedience. If we can get that obedience idea in our minds and we ask the question, okay, how can I implement obedience with my child in a strategic way? And that's where we come to this idea of action point. An action point is the point where you stop talking and you start acting. And the interesting thing about it is your child already knows where your action point is. So, and sometimes you can even ask them and they will say, it's when you yell at me or when you start moving toward me. You know, children know that they better stop doing whatever they're doing because mom means business now, even though she said it 5 times before. Now we know this is the time where I better start moving or something is going to happen here that I don't like.
Yeah. So mom has an action point. Dad has an action point. The Sunday school teacher has an action point. Everybody and they're all different for different adults.
That's right. And I think that's why the babysitter has a hard time with the children sometimes because she has a very loose action point. I think sometimes grandma has a tighter action point. Sometimes she has a looser action point, but every parent has an action point. And the action point determines at what point a child starts responding. And the interesting thing is children know how to respond in given situations. That's why they act differently at school than they do at home, or they respond differently to dad than they do to mom. A lot of it has to do with the way the instructions are communicated because children learn how to play the game, so to speak. They learn what the rules are of the relationship that they're involved in.
Okay, so my kid seems to know my action point, but if I'm mom, if I'm dad, I'm watching this, how do I figure out what my action point is? How do I start recognizing the cues that I'm using to get kids to obey?
That's a real good question. And I think one of the greatest things to do is ask kids. I mean, kids know, how do you know when your dad means business? Well, his eyes get narrow and he sticks his neck out. How do you know when what mom's action point is? Well, the vein on her neck starts bulging. I mean, children can see these things,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes they can. Sometimes it's just the idea of yelling as opposed to using words. But I think that parents feel uncomfortable many times because their kids don't do what they want them to do. When I ask the question in a parenting seminar, I say, how many of you have a problem with your child either not following instructions right away, you have to tell them several times, their attitude isn't right? Most of the parents raise their hand.
Yeah.
We have a problem with kids not listening. And I'm sure you do the same when you teach the parenting seminar.
Yeah.
And I think that that's because of this idea of action point. So when parents start to change it just makes a big difference in the lives of families. I'm training coaches right now. One of the coaches, I was reading her report today. This is the week 2 report. So week 1 is just finished. Mom has realized that she does a lot of yelling and she wants to stop doing that. And so I said to her, I want to find out from this mom, how is she thinking differently and how is she acting differently? Because I want to share that with other parents. One of my clients right now has a similar problem. She uses intensity to get things done, and her children know it. When she gets into Rambo mode, man, her kids start moving because mom's at it now. So, but I don't think we have to have that intensity. I think we can use words to communicate our action point. But just ask yourself this question. Okay, say you've said it once and your child doesn't do it. And so you say it again and your child doesn't do it. You say it again a third time and your child doesn't do it. What do you do next that gets your child moving? That's how you're going to tell what your action point is. And many times it's things that aren't that productive. So we want to go back to the beginning here and redesign the action point in a way that parents can use it much more effectively.
Yeah. And so we really need to eliminate negative cues that we're using to cue kids in because it's negatively impacting the relationship to them. So I've had parents sometimes say something like this, and they'll say, yeah, of course, I don't want to be like yelling and screaming, but sometimes I think a kid needs to hear you raise your voice a little bit so they know you mean business. There's a thinking error behind that statement. What does that parent need to understand or change in their beliefs there?
Well, the reality is that when you raise your voice, children know that you mean it because you've taught them that that's your action point. And the problem with harshness, and that's really what we're talking about here, because the intensity, when you raise your voice, it communicates this message of disapproval, and a child feels unloved, unwanted, And it really challenges a child's security when we use harshness to solve problems. So you want to make a change. You do not have to use anger to get your kids to follow instructions. Some parents say, you don't know my kids. My kids only respond when I get angry. And that's when I say, that's because you've trained them that way. Let's retrain them. Let's have a meeting and say, son, I realize that I'm doing a lot of yelling around here. I know you don't like it. I don't like it. I want to make some changes, but it means I'm going to have to respond differently to you, and I'm going to ask you to respond differently to me. Can we practice this a little bit so I'm not using yelling? I'd like to use some word cues that'll help you, and then we move to something different than the intensity that we used previously.
If you're just checking this video out, we're talking with Dr. Scott Turansky, co-founder of the National Center for Biblical Parenting, author, speaker, professor, parenting coach trainer. He's the person who helped train me. And we're talking about how you can help your child obey without yelling. And we're specifically focusing in on this issue of action points. And if you like the idea of not having to yell to get your kid to do what you're saying, go ahead and hit the like button on this video as we start talking about the very thing Scott's bringing up here, which is having this conversation with your kid. Let's talk, Scott, a little bit about that conversation that I sit down with my kid. I just love the idea that this isn't, I had a parent one time that I was coaching who said, you know, you guys seem to let the kids in on the secrets. Like, you're not just coming up with ideas in the back room, you're involving them in this process. Talk a little bit about the partnership really that happens in family life, in building cooperation between parents and kids.
Yes. So this meeting we call a vision casting meeting. It's important whenever you want to change the rules in a family. The rules, but I mean the operating principles, the way we're relating together. And now you're saying, I want to make a change here in how we're relating. So this meeting, this vision meeting, I would suggest you would do well to have three parts to it. The first part, you're just telling your child some positive things they're doing in regards to character. So you're not saying you're getting good grades, you're saying you're working harder at school. I can see that you're growing in that area. So we're drawing attention to the inner qualities children have. That's the first part of this vision meeting. Then we say something like this. One thing I want to help you with and start working on more is this idea of cooperation. Now, I'll often use the word cooperation instead of the word obedience, because sometimes obedience has taken on a negative connotation in a family if parents have used it a lot. I don't think it's a negative word, but to avoid that, we sometimes use the word cooperation, which has a similar feel to it. And we're going to work on cooperation, and then we tell them why. This is going to help you to do better on a ball team or do better at in your school work. It's going to help us have a better working relationship together. It's going to help you to be a better dad someday or a better mom someday. It's going to help you in every relationship. Cooperation is so important. So we're going to practice it together. So we've told them what good things they're learning. We've told them what we're going to work on and why. And the third thing we say is some emotional statement like, and I can hardly wait, or this is going to be great. I'm going to enjoy working on this with you. Something that puts you on the same side as your child. So we're explaining this in general. Then we launch into some very practical structures that can teach this so that we can do training exercises in the course of the day.
So we have this meeting, and then we actually have to go out and do it. And some of that is reminders to ourselves. Hey, we said we were changing our action point. We need to work on ourselves. And some of it is practicing with some basic routines we introduced in family life with our kids too. Is that about right?
I think so. I think that many times when parents want to give instructions, the child's involved in something. And just think about it on the child's perspective. If the child has to leave what they're doing and do something else, that's a two-step process. So the first thing I would suggest that parents do is teach their children to come when called. When I call your name, you need to disengage what you're doing and come to me. This is so valuable. This is foundational for emotional management because the child's letting go of something, which is so crucial for dealing with anger or sadness or anxiety. You have to let it go. So we're teaching our children how to let things go, and they're coming. So there's much more involved in this process of learning how to cooperate than just getting tasks done. There's some very important process things going on inside of the heart that the child has to give up what they're doing. So you're actually giving your child a gift by separating the two tasks. Instead of saying, you need to turn off the TV and go get your pajamas on. Now we're not doing that. Now we're just saying, we're calling the child's name, and we don't even tell them why we're calling them. We just call their name.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
child
I've
comes,
talked
and
to families about that too. I'll usually use a name like Jonathan. I just make it up. And I said, you're calling Jonathan. You're like, Jonathan, you need to go get your pajamas on. Jonathan, you need to turn the TV off, go get your pajamas on. Well, the choice is between getting my pajamas on or watching TV. I know which one I want to do if I'm Jonathan. But if it's just Jonathan, the choice is now between TV and parent. And that's a harder choice. I still might lose, and we've got solutions for that, but it's a harder choice in the heart. But once the child makes that choice to, just by saying their name, to turn the TV off and come, they've made a decision in their heart to start down the road of cooperation, which leads to a better chance when you tell them you need to put your pajamas on, that they'll actually do it too.
that's right. Yeah. So we're going to separate those two things. Having a child come when called is good. And then I would suggest when you give a child a task that you use the words you need to instead of I need you to, or
Yeah.
can you please, or something. And this is very significant because when you say to a child you need to, you're really fostering conscience development in a child. You're really helping a child wrestle with the I need to versus the I want to. It's so powerful when a child has to go into the workshop of their own heart and wrestle with this particular issue. So I would suggest very powerful to have children, for a parent to say, you need to do this now. And often those are the key words, and that becomes your action point. When
Yeah.
I say you need to now, I mean business. And if you don't do it, then I am going to take some action. So the point is, this is the line we're setting with using words instead of harshness. And we don't have to do it in a mean voice, but we are going to do it with an authoritative voice. Son, you need to do this now.
Yeah.
And that communicates a message. This is my action point.
Talk a little bit about the role of positive praise and supporting kids that way when they're doing the right thing, and how that can affect the child, the relationship, and ultimately change their level of obedience.
Well, it's always good to catch children doing the right thing, but we also have to remember that children are in process. So I encourage parents to affirm children for approximately right, not just absolutely right. So let's say we just start to work on this and the child does come when called but has a bad attitude. I might even ignore the bad attitude at first, just because we're starting to get a new routine going. The
Mm-hmm.
child's learning to come when called, and we're getting some progress. Then I'm going to come back and address the attitude. So we're affirming an approximately right posture here with children. And then I would also suggest that when we praise children, we want to praise them for character, not just behavior. When I say to a child, I've noticed that you're becoming more responsible at cleaning up your bedroom before you leave it in the morning, making your bed and putting your pajamas away. I notice that responsibility is growing in you. Then that means a lot more to a child than just, oh, hey, you put your pajamas away and made your bed. We're talking about character. Now, character is transferable because now we're going to see that character quality demonstrated in other areas of life, and we can affirm it now in the schoolwork or the homework or the chores or the taking stuff away when you're done at the table. All of those things are demonstrations of responsibility. And now we're affirming children for something that's growing inside of their hearts. Remember, we're interested in a heart-based approach, not just behavior. So if we're trying to get into the heart of a child, we want to make sure we're affirming heart qualities that are defining this child's maturity and their development and their growth. That's what we're trying to do here with our affirmation.
That's fantastic. Now, what we're talking about here is coming out of a lot of different resources you have at the National Center for Biblical Parenting, but specifically, we kind of looked at the home improvement book. And I think we talked about maybe 4 pages in that whole book. And yet there's so much rich content in just 4 pages here. Talk a little bit about this digital resource you now have with the home improvement book that parents can get, and I'll make sure there's links and things like that available for parents. But why don't you talk a little bit about that?
All right. So the home improvement video series is an 8-part video series that allows parents in their own homes to understand theology. And then each one contains a practical application. Like this action point is very practical for parents. But the first part of the video is all about obedience and why it's so important. Then we also talk about correction and then give you practical ideas for correction. We talk about accepting no as an answer. We talk about attitudes. We talk about rules. Do you know that rules are the hands and feet of our values and our and our convictions. And that's why God gives us so many rules in the scriptures. So in that part of the video series, I'm just elaborating on the value of rules and then talking about how we establish them in family life. So very practical sessions, but each one starts with an important theology of parenting that parents need to know. And so when they purchase the kit for their family, it contains, first of all, the videos. It also contains the book we're talking about, Home Improvement. We call it Home Improvement, the parenting book you can read to your kids. That's its official title. Because the first part of every book starts with a fictional story of Craig and Marlene and their two kids as they're learning things about family life. And the kids are learning them, the parents are learning them, and they have discussions. So the first part of every chapter is a fictional story of this family growing and learning. Then the last part of every chapter has a practical idea. And in lesson 1 or chapter 1, Craig and Marlene learn about action point in the fictional side, and then we show you how to develop your action point in the teaching side. So the book itself comes along with the video series, and you can just read along in the content management program. It's all there. And then there's the ability for you to download a worksheet that's all about the theology of obedience. There are discussion questions that you can go through if you're doing this in a group. So some churches are doing this in small groups because it's a great opportunity for a small group to discuss these things, go away, practice them, come back and say what worked in your family. So it becomes a great tool for parents to learn and develop and grow. So that's Home Improvement that people can find. And I know you got the links there that people can go to so that they can purchase the program. There's a church license, and there's also a family license. So you can just use it in your family, or if you want to use it in a church context, you pay for the license for a church. But either way, it's a great tool for helping parents embed their parenting principles into their faith. And that gives parents much more motivation and conviction to move forward in this whole area of parenting.
Yeah, and all those links are right in the description down below, both the ones for the families and for churches as well. Scott, where can people find you if they're not going to grab one of those links, but they really do want to know more about the National Center for Biblical Parenting?
Well, we have 7 websites, but let's send you to our main one, which is biblicalparenting.org. If you go to biblicalparenting.org, it'll take you off into the different websites, but that's the website that gives you all kinds of resources. There's a blog there. There's the best way to get around the website with over 500 pages on it. Go down to the site map at the bottom. It's like an index of all of the things, and you can easily find what you want by going to the bottom down there, and you'll see church resources, you'll see family resources of all kinds that you can embrace there, and follow the links, and they'll lead you to products or articles that you can enjoy as well. It's our desire to help parents embrace a heart-based approach. And this heart-based approach is so strategic. It's totally different than behavior modification. And it really produces some amazing results and brings about change in the lives of children.
All right. Well, thank you, Scott, for your time here today. Thank you and to Joanne for all the work you've done over the years at the National Center for Biblical Parenting. Thank you on behalf of lots of parents that I've worked with. Thank you on behalf of myself and my wife and the work we've done with our children. And if you're still watching us here on YouTube and you're interested in some more heart-based approach strategies, take a look at the 2 videos I'll link right here. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you real soon. Bye, everyone.